Imagine this, a man who dominated music, movies, and the hearts of millions, yet his most fascinating stories aren't about his hits or his fame, but the women who stood beside him on screen. Elvis Presley wasn't just a rock legend, he was a box office phenomenon, but his films were a strange paradox. Critics hated them, fans adored them, and yet, none of them lost money. But here's what's wild, the women who shared the spotlight with him. Their stories are buried beneath the myth of the king. Let me tell you, there's so much more to these relationships than you've ever heard. Take Dolores Hart, for example. She kissed Elvis on camera in 1957, and the director had to cover her blushing ears. Can you imagine that? A 19-year-old girl, terrified, trying to act opposite the most iconic man in the world. But here's the kicker, she left Hollywood in 1963 to become a nun. Think about that. A woman who could have been a star chose a life of silence and faith. What does that say about the pressures of fame in the 1960s? It's almost like she saw through the glitter of stardom and realized it wasn't worth the cost. Then there's Barbara Eden. She played a Native American woman in Flaming Star, a role that required real acting, and she's the one who called Elvis out for doing it well. But here's what's fascinating, she remembered how Elvis would casually strum his guitar between takes, just hanging out with his dad and friends. This isn't the Elvis we know, the one in leather jackets and sequins. This is a guy who could be a regular guy, even in a movie that was, frankly, terrible. It makes you wonder, what if he'd been given better material? Would we have seen a different side of him? And let's talk about Ann-Margret. She wasn't just a co-star, she was a match for Elvis in every way. They had chemistry on screen, and off-screen, they had a romance that neither ever confirmed. But here's the thing, in an era where women were expected to fade into the background, Ann-Margret didn't just survive, she thrived. She had solo numbers, she stole scenes, and she held her own. That's rare. That's revolutionary. It's like she was saying, hey, I'm not just here for your ego, I've got my own. Now, Shelley Fabares. She's the only woman to appear in 3 Elvis films, and she even had a Billboard hit that was dethroned by Elvis himself. But what's wild is how she's remembered, not for her own career, but for being in his shadow. It's almost like the story of Elvis overshadows everything else. But think about this, she was a regular on a TV show, and she had a hit song. Yet her legacy is tied to Elvis. That's the tragedy of fame, it can eclipse even the most talented people. Donna Douglas, the Beverly Hillbillies star, had a spiritual connection with Elvis. They meditated together. In a world that reduced him to a sex symbol, she saw something deeper. And Mary Tyler Moore. She played a nun resisting temptation opposite Elvis, and he confessed he had a crush on her since she was on The Dick Van Dyke Show. Can you imagine that? The future icon of TV, shyly kicking dirt while admitting he liked her. It's like the universe was setting up a story that never happened. So here's the thing, these women weren't just extras in Elvis's story. They were collaborators, challengers, and sometimes, even his equals. But their legacies are often forgotten. What does that say about how we remember icons? We focus on the men, not the people who stood beside him. And that's a shame. Because these stories aren't just about Elvis, they're about the women who dared to be in his orbit, and the choices they made. Next time you hear blue suede shoes, think about the women who helped make that magic happen. Because their stories matter too.